Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this show brought to you by the Block Party Podcast. We just wanted to take a moment before we start with our show to address some things that have been happening in our nation, in our world, that we have been enlightened to and have learned quite a bit about.
We recognize our privilege and our platform, and we stand to fight directly against racism.
To help in the fight against racism and racial inequality, we at the Block Party Podcast Network have made a donation to the Equal Justice Initiative. The Equal Justice Initiative is a nonprofit that is committed to challenging racial and economic injustice in the United States, as well as ending mass incarceration and excessive punishment. Besides education and research, they provide legal representation to those who have been illegally arrested and unfairly sentenced, as well as providing re-entry assistance to those who had been previously incarcerated.
Our promise, as a network, to keep the conversation going. We know there is always more we can learn and understand, and we commit ourselves to doing just that.
Black Lives Matter. We see you, we hear you, and we stand with you. And we hope that each of you who are listening today would join us in the fight by donating to a charity of your choice that you found and learned to appreciate over this time. And so, without further ado, we hope that you enjoy this episode of the Dungeon Masters Block you are about to listen to.
Well, welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of all the people at the table. I'm your host, DM Mitch, and for this episode today, Neal and me will be joined by Kathleen Mercury, and we're going to be talking about the wizard class, how to interact with a player who is playing a wizard, how to run wizards as NPCs, and just the lore behind wizards as well. I'll be honest, we dive a little bit into the sorcerer aspect of it as well and talk about the difference between the two of those, but it's a fun and fantastic conversation all around. I'm excited for you to hear it. But before we jump in, I've got one 5-star review to give a shout out to, and this one comes from Sly Thy Tobes. And it's entitled, Welp, Back to the Beginning. That's right, I've just caught up on all of the episodes, and what a phenomenally brilliant resource this has been. I've been constantly drawing upon this well of wisdom, and I'm pretty sure my players have reaped the rewards unaware. I've greatly enjoyed this show, and I recommend it as often as I can in real life and Twitter. And now, I'm going to start over. Thank you so much, Sly Thy Tobes. That's fantastic. I'm so glad that you love the show so much that you are passionate to go through again. I mean, I've done this with other things that I love, like The Office, but that's a big undertaking, and it really means a lot that you love our show that much that you're willing to take that journey again, because this is like, I mean, going through the Dungeon Master's Block, that's no like walk around the block. That's like a Misty Mountains journey, if anything. So thanks so much for that review. And with that, without any further ado, let's head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
The flat meat's back on the menu, boys.
For the meat this week, I'm excited to introduce to you a new guest on the Dungeon Master's Block, Kathleen Mercury, teacher, game designer, and podcaster. Kathleen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So excited to have you here.
Yes, and as always, we're going to jump straight into some interview questions. And one of my favorite questions to ask is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Long walks on the beach, anything that you think our listeners would find interesting.
Well, I'm a middle school gifted teacher, which means when I run games for my RPG groups, it's like working with adult versions of my students. So it's always a lot of fun to both try to corral and also allow them to, create really amazing experiences. I've been teaching game design for, I think, 13, 14 years. And of note, if anybody wants to teach game design or interested, all of my resources are available for free at KathleenMercury.com. So semester plus of game design teaching resources, have at it. I'm a co-host on a number of podcasts, Games in Schools and Libraries, on board games. I've been a host on Board Game Broads, Our Turn, a whole bunch of others. I like to be a guest on podcasts because I like to talk. And I'm also a game designer with just this week, my second game, having signed it. So
Fantastic.
It's been pretty great.
That's great. Oh, man, you love to talk. I love to talk. Neil, it's going to be hard for you to get a word in edgewise. It sounds like this episode.
That's all right. I'm ready to just go along for the ride.
Nice.
So definitely, listeners, check out all of that stuff. We will, as we always do, have links in our show notes to Kathleen's website, to her podcast. Go check them out. Have a fantastic time doing that. Kathleen, now for you to have a fantastic time, we have a surprise question for you.
Cool.
This surprise question comes from one of our Patreon dragons, Jared Arteche. And Jared asks, if you, Kathleen, were a dragon, what would you hoard?
If I was a dragon, what would I hoard?
My joy with this question is like, are you a dragon? But where did you put yourself? Like, are you a modern day dragon? Because you have fun.
Well, It's funny because the game that I'm working on with Colossal is called Ragnarok, and it started off as pigeons. That's a whole other story. But basically, it's kind of like Daenerys the game, in that you are a dragon and you are fed up with these so-called heroes trampling your rights and your autonomy, and just, coming into your horde, is taking your gold from you. And because you're a dragon, you're not so agreeable. So you basically go to burn them and their village down. So it's just using 4 different dexterity actions to like knock over meeples and to shoot cubes into buildings with holes in them and stuff like that. I always call it Flick 'em Up meets Gloomhaven. And Isaac Childress didn't think that was as funny as I did, but he's cool. Hi, Isaac. So anyway, I guess if I had to pick something based on that, I would hoard. I mean, if I say the remnants of the patriarchy, there's going to be some people that are going to get real fussy with me really quickly. So, really just kidding. I would say since we're in quarantine, the thing that I have discovered when it comes to food, I'm going to pick something really ridiculous, but if you haven't tried it, chocolate pretzel Pop-Tarts are the most amazing things ever. So I'll say screwball, peanut butter whiskey, and chocolate pretzel Pop-Tarts. And that's going to be part of my gaming table for a long time, either alone or when Bless were able to play with other people. So it's probably a terrible answer.
No,
but quite honestly, those are 2 things I value highly right now.
That is a wonderful answer. First, thank you, Kathleen, for answering. And of course, thank you, Jared, for supporting us as you do and giving us that question. But I also love the idea of changing dragons up. Like, why does every dragon want gold? Why doesn't certain dragons want like this random thing that's their hoard? And I just imagine having a party go in and be like, what is this?
There are so many bottles and boxes of Pop-Tarts in here.
Yeah, and the dragon, like, I'm just laying there, like, rubbing my tummy, like, dude, like, it's cool. Don't ruin my buzz.
You can have one, and then please go. But
right. There's no problem heating them up either.
Oh.
Exactly.
No problem.
So there is no logical segue. So off we go to talk about wizards. As you've read, as you've heard from our intro, we're going to be talking all about the wizard class. And so one of the first questions that we have in this section is the making of a wizard. I know beforehand we talked a little bit about the differences between a wizard and a sorcerer. So one of the questions to throw out and discuss is what makes a wizard to each of us?
Well, one thing that I have to say is, I have played D&D, and I've played a number of different iterations put on by the guys in my gaming group, because of what we call my rich full life and busy travel schedule, before current situation, going to lots of cons and stuff like that made it really hard for me to be a constant character in a lot of games. So a lot of times I would create characters that were relatively short-lived just to kill them off. And the one thing that I found, the nice thing about that was I was able to create a lot of different characters. And one of the reasons why I liked being a sorcerer was combat doesn't really interest me that much when it comes to D&D. Like, I roll, I miss, I roll, I hit. Like, for me as a person, they kind of feel the same. And then especially when you're fighting the big monster at the end, and it just like constantly just sort of like chipping away like little hunks of ice off this big, monster. I mean, that's great. And I think there's lots of really fun, creative ways that you can do that, but I tend to get bored with that. And so what I like about the wizard or sorcerer, why I picked the sorcerer, was I just like the ability that when we're role playing, that I could do really cool things that weren't necessarily I hit you with something, having that ability to do that. And it's funny because even before this podcast, I was sort of refreshing myself on the differences between a wizard and a sorcerer because I couldn't necessarily tell you. And what was interesting though, in talking about wizard versus sorcerers, like, from my understanding, wizards can learn more. With sorcerers, it's more innate. And so the thing, especially since I'm running a Harry Potter game, it's really tilts way more heavily that they're more sorcerers than they are wizards, which I found interesting.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because in the way that, specifically the way that I read the 5th edition wizard, it almost gives this sense that wizards can be anyone as long as they study, which is certainly, you go back in older editions and there were more restrictions. It was like, to become a wizard, you needed a specific level of intelligence. And then you could become a wizard. Then you could study magic and learn magic. Whereas sorcerers seemingly would be more rare because like you said, it's something from within them. It's some power boiling inside. And yeah, Harry Potter is kind of this weird mix because they do learn, but there's also this like there's muggles and there's wizards, and every now and then there's a squib, but like you need this magic that's inside of you,
right?
And part of me kind of likes that, honestly. For my own homebrew world, I honestly have taken that because there's nothing to say that you cannot do that with the wizard class. And so in my homebrew world, in order to become a wizard, yes, you need to study, but also you need to be able to have the ability to read the arcane script or the language of magic. And so not everyone has that ability. And for me, that allowed me to go, yeah, wizards are still more common than sorcerers by far in my world, but still not everyone can be a wizard. You need to have this gift, this connection with the arcane. But I mean, that's up to you as a DM, right? As a game master, like, do you want anybody to be able to pick up a spell book and to be able to, given enough time and energy, learn magic? Or is it something that, do they need midichlorian count to be fairly high? What is it that gets them there?
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're throwing Molotov cocktails now, man. Do you know what you're saying? Well, and I think especially in the Harry Potter world, they learn spells, but they don't really delve that deeply into what learning means. It's like, basically, do you say it just right? Do you really get like the swish and flick just right? Have either of you read the book series The Magicians or seen the TV show?
I've seen the TV show, yes.
The book's really good. It's like a grown-up version of Harry Potter, with a, significantly more like relationship complexity. But even as far as how they do the spells and how they treat it, it is a lot more in terms of wizardry, in terms of learning spells. Whereas, in Harry Potter, it's like, if you say blah, 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 and wave your magic stick in a way, this thing is going to happen. I mean, there's very few times where people fail at spells. It's basically waiting for them to be able to do it. And so I think having more of a focus on the ability to make it like a really learned skill is something that's super interesting to me, that could be more developed. And the reason why I'm saying this is I run my game on Sunday nights, and in thinking about what I want to run on Sunday night, now I'm thinking a lot more about, how can I make an interesting session where really learning spells and understanding innately what creates a spell, like, is there a way to actually make that part of what we do? And see, now you've got me thinking.
So one of the interesting things from everything that's already been said is I almost see the sorcerer as using like an internal battery. to access their spells, whereas a wizard is using more of this external source. And then your world is dependent on how much, I guess, energy you have out there. Like the world of Harry Potter, I would say, is just prevailed with this magic energy that everyone can kind of tap into. Whereas if you have a lower magic scale, you have the old wizened wizard in their tower because they need to spend all of this additional extra time to figure out how to tap into that resource to be able to use these spells. Again, whereas Harry Potter, it's like, well, as long as you can say this and that and wave your stick around, you're good. Now, some of the more complex magic, either you need to innately have that or you need to spend that extra time.
Well, so, and my game is based off Lady Blackbird, which if people aren't familiar with it, it's great. It's a low prep, all-in-one, free, like 17-page PDF, but 12 pages of that are just character sheets. I mean, the rules are just, maybe a total page or two at the most of like all content for the game itself, for both in terms of the world and how to play. And I really like it because it has in it, like, basically character abilities are narrative. And the more, ways that you incorporate these sort of like narrative skills you have means the more dice you can roll. But I had to come up with a secondary mechanic for how they could learn spells. And so you basically get dice based on one, just being alive, the number of years that you're a Hogwarts student, and then for each year, basically there's different spells you can unlock, more or less. And once you learn a spell, it becomes much easier for you to roll it. So the first time, like a year one rolls for a spell to try to do it, they have 5 dice and 3 have to be successes, just your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, success, failure. But once they succeed in that, then they automatically have like a strength of 5 in terms of rolling for that spell again, which means they won't necessarily always be able to roll that spell if it's got like a difficulty of 3, but it's certainly a lot easier once you played it once. So I have a little bit of that sort of learning aspect. So usually at the beginning of the session, I'll let them, pick a spell and, give them a shot to try to just learn it, add it to what they can do. But they can also try to do those during the game itself, and so that gives them another type of decision point in the game as far as, do I want to use some of my narrative abilities to try to do something, or do I want to cast a spell and trying to do that?
And I think this is a great point to transition into talking about, how do we as DMs, as GMs, interact with players who choose to be PCs, whether you are running a game in like the Harry Potter universe where all of your PCs are wizards, or where you are running a game where you have a PC as a wizard, or just how you role play a wizard as an NPC when you are DMing. And I think that, like, as said, like, there is this, one of the strongest things is this separation between the sorcerer class and the wizard class. I think when I think sorcerer, I think of a sorcerer's magic is more of a reaction to the world around him or her, or maybe a sorcerer, you can boil it down to a sense of pathos, like maybe even like their magic is emotionally driven, or something within, whereas the wizard is more studious, learning, like we're saying, more logos, more the magic is preparing for the world around them, preparing certain spells for what is to come. So as game masters, as DMs, how do you interact more with your players to bring out this? We talked a bit about it a little bit, especially you, Kathleen, a little bit already. But how do you bring out this studious aspect of the wizard? How do you bring that out for your PCs? How do you bring that out in your NPCs to give across this aspect of the wizard class?
Well, one thing that's sort of interesting, especially when it comes to sort of mechanically what I want to have happen in this game, because I mean, I'm pretty strongly rooted, coming at this from a board game, tabletop game design perspective, so I, looking at how much ability do I want players to have to magically solve problems. If I have this whole complex thing and somebody can just be like, okay, boop, then for me as a GM, it's like, I'm, just like, okay, I wasn't expecting that, because magic, you can do all kinds of things and just like boosh, whip things away. And so that's one of the nice things about how what I did with mine is like there's levels. They just can't access certain spells until they get to those types of levels. And so everything they have are like the pretty basic ones, like lights on, lights off, unlock a door, stop a spell, because that way for me as the DM, it's a lot easier to sort of control out the narrative that I'm playing, And I think when it comes to the nice thing about board games or RPGs or whatever else is they collapse the rules of science and society. It's really, really hard to make a perfect simulation in a board game. It's really hard to make a perfect simulation in a role play game. So that's okay. And so how we lean into that in terms of how do we use magic to solve problems, both for players, as players, as NPCs, and as DMs. But the problem can be sometimes is depending on how loosely you define this magic, you could really empower players to totally shift your game into a place that you were not expecting it to go. And then as a DM, you're thinking, okay, here's what I have planned, here's what's happening, and how do I resolve the two on the fly?
It's so good. You broke my brain. Also, I looked up Lady Blackbird. That also broke my brain. So I think one of the big things is like we're all kind of alluding to. I don't necessarily know that I have an answer. So all I have is thoughts, which is fine because I only have one wizard in my game. So, but luckily for me, that player, part of the background of that wizard is to seek out knowledge. And that they find knowledge as power. And so then that's constantly something that I can put in front of them as a way to have them interact and continue to be wizardly. The other thing that I just thought of, based off of everything, there's a weird element of like, I'm level 5, I can shoot a fireball. Prior to moments ago, I could not do that. And so there's a weird element of that I would also like almost want to incorporate earlier on with that player of like, okay, so what do you think about having as your, like when you reach 5th level, you unlock these 3rd level spells or however that system works. Like, what are you thinking about ahead of time? Like planning out a little bit more of that wizard and that interaction of like, okay, so then as you're going along, you find this bit of material that now, like maybe you should test these things. And so on the downtime or when they're sleeping and resting, that they invest more effort into unlocking these spells. And again, instead of like World of Warcraft, oh, I almost died. I leveled up. I have full health. I have new abilities. Yay!
Yeah.
That's great. Like to think of like as you're on the road, like in a carriage, the wizard would be like diving into a new spell and mechanically, right? Like they're not able to cast it yet, but that idea of like, yeah, this like even to role play, like I mean, wizard is my favorite class. To be able to role play a wizard and do that myself, and to be looking up a level 9 spell and just have my level 1 wizard be like, oh my gosh, this is so intricate. Like I don't know if I'll ever reach this point. But like to have them studying spells ahead of time before they reach that mechanical breakthrough level adds that cool role-playing aspect of, yeah, like you said, Neil, it's not just like, all right, you're a new level, here's your spells, cool, you've got them now. No, I've been working on this, man, I can finally cast this spell. Right, that's fantastic.
Well, and in the most recent game that I was playing, I picked Tiefling as my character, as my class, because I thought my race, because I thought that'd be cool, right? Be a demon, do all kinds of stuff. And I was like, Scion of Bane and all this stuff. And then in our very first game, there were some soldiers there who are like Knights of Bane. I'm like, perfect. And I'm trying to like command them to do stuff. And again, not knowing a whole lot about, like I'm not deep by any means on D&D. And they're like, well, it doesn't really work that way. I'm like, no, wait a minute. Like the blood of the dude that they follow like flows in my veins. So I think I should be able to do some type of command or something like that. They're like, no, it doesn't really work that way. And I was like, ah. So then I was basically just a barbarian, which I thought would be cool to be like demon barbarian. And so then after we were done, I was like, for the first session, I was like, can I please change my character? I know that's like, whoa, what are you saying? You know what I mean? But they're like, fine. I said, I want to do cool things. Being a barbarian, I'd done it before. It is fun to kind of smash stuff and like talk about how you're going to do that. But I wanted a different experience. And that's when they had me become a sorcerer. And I'm like, oh, I can do all this cool stuff now. Because like, that's the thing is like, in a fight, like rolling and hitting, rolling and hitting, rolling and hitting isn't super interesting. But if I can try to like create, because that's the thing that I liked about being a sorcerer, is you can create spells that changes the world. Not necessarily has a direct impact on the conflict. I mean, it can, but the fact that you can have an impact that's greater than just hitting somebody with a stick. To me, that was immensely more interesting, immensely more entertaining, and I was way more engaged as a player when I felt like I was going to be able to have an impact on the game, not because of, this, my range and, my hit strength, my armor class and all that other stuff, but because of like what I could actually do. And so for me, that's why I really dug it.
I'd like to circle back to at one point, Kathleen, you were talking about like, oh man, now my brain is working about the current game that I'm working on, thinking like, how do I bring out the element of like learning spells? And I mean, to me, especially when we're talking about wizards, like that's something I think that I would want to, when running a game with a PC or PCs, like who are playing wizards, like really encourage. Not to say that I wouldn't allow this with a sorcerer or a warlock or whatever the magic casting class is, but I think I would even go out on a limb more when somebody who's playing a wizard is like casts fireball or a spell that does one thing, but they're like, man, it'd be just so cool if like instead of like it being that fireball, if it was like, I would love to have been able to make it a giant ball of electricity, or a giant, like, when Sauron in Lord of the Rings just explodes in sound and everybody falls down, like that would be something that would be cool if it was something like that. And I think as the DM, I would say, cool. So why doesn't your wizard start messing around? Start dabbling with different materials. Start reading, like, and maybe like changing the spell components and the spell words and the way you move your hand. And I mean, I would probably go, and this is a fantastic time to bring in some arcane failure if things go awry and have some fun there. But like, but to say and to encourage and be like, yeah, you know what? Your wizard would be interested in studying different ways to use their magic. So let's do that. Let's role play through that. Let's do it, man. Let's see what happens. Do it.
Well, see, and it's so funny while you're saying that. I was right there with you because, spells in the Harry Potter world are basically all spells of convenience, Oh, cool. You can turn on the lights. Oh, you can turn off the lights. Oh, you can unlock a door now. Oh,
lazy wizards.
It's amazing how the spells they learn just become so incredibly important right there at that moment. And so in our previous session that we did, and this is one of my favorite adventures that I've written for this one, is basically in the Harry Potter world, Voldemort wants the Elder Wand. And if this is spoilers, but it's been out for a while, so sorry. He wants this all-powerful wand. And when he manages to get it, you never see or hear from his original wand. So I created this adventure where it's, where is Voldemort's wand? There are people offering a reward for it. And one thing that I had learned when I was reading about, just on Pottermore about the Harry Potter world, was that it was a yew tree wand. And one of the little things in there was upon the death of wizards who have a yew wand, the wand itself will grow around the grave of its owner to protect it. So I ended up having them go into the Forbidden Forest. They find this yew tree, and then they realize that not only have they found his wand, but they've actually found the grave of Voldemort, which adds this whole other element. And so the part that I push them to, and the part that happens is someone realizes that they need to basically grab the tree, try to cast a spell. Usually it's Lumos, right? So it lights up the whole sky like an atom bomb going off. But then I have the wand, if you're not familiar with Harry Potter, forgive me, and I'm almost done, shift its allegiance to the person who cast the spell. So whomever did that suddenly has like probably one of the most powerful wands in the whole pantheon of Harry Potter, now has its allegiance to them. And then it's always led itself to some of the best role-playing moments between characters when they're arguing about, should we turn it in for the reward? Who is it offering the reward? You shouldn't have this powerful wand. The wand itself becomes this place where there's a lot of like philosophical discussion about what that ownership means and just everything, and arguing with each other, like, that's too much power, you can't have that, like, I don't want you to have that. I've had people run up and grab and break the wand, and in our most recent one they let her have it. So now one of the little witches, because all of the characters in my game, by the way, are witches, because if you're familiar with the Bechdel test, it's a test to see how much time there are named female characters in any type of work talking about something that isn't a man. And Harry Potter, Star Wars, so many of them fail miserably. So it's just all witches. And so anyway, so what I'm thinking while you were talking about this is, because Harry Potter spells are basically spells of convenience, that maybe I'll make our next session all about delving deeper into wand lore, having them trying to learn more about it, and then having them create and craft more spells that are suited to their characters, both as a way for like character development, but also to give them some more interesting tools and tricks to play with, other than, hey, guess what, I can now unlock a door.
Yeah, it's so good. And,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's the perfect segue, because the next thing we're talking about, which, to be honest, we already just started talking about, is adventures, ideas, or the wizard or wizards that you have, in the idea that you have that perfect DM-GM moment. You don't have to do anything, and they're all talking amongst each other. And then you're like, yeah, good, now it's my turn to check my phone. I'm totally kidding.
Yeah.
But the idea that love the idea that wand
we've
or
all
the
been
spell book that they've heard of, is it even, that arcane knowledge, because there's an element that, one, is very powerful, and you do have that discussion of, should our wizard have this? Is it going to turn them down a road that, because my first thought is, okay, that's a spell book, but then is that actually just a phylactery now? Because our wizard wants to live forever, because they want to seek more knowledge, throwing in that moral gray area for your party. So what are some interesting ideas for wizard?
Well, I think the fundamental question is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Especially if you really want to tap into magic as a source of personal power and your ability to control and affect the world around you. And coming up with the right type of situation where players are suddenly faced with the ability to, how do I address this particular situation? So thinking about my little witches, is I need to come up with not, hey, this is wand class, now you guys are going to make stuff up, but giving them some type of problem, whether it's personal or it's one they're all facing together, or hopefully some combination of all of those, giving them some type of problem where they have to try to figure out their best way to solve it, knowing that you might be giving them, as the GM, a little bit more power than you think they deserve at this point, but that you're just going to have to work with in order to keep them fully engaged and invested.
Giving them more power than they deserve. All I can think of in my head is Ash finding the Necronomicon at this point. And I'm just like, oh gosh, you just drop a tomb of extreme power in front of your wizards, who many of which are going to go like, yeah, we're all about learning new powers, and like having them exposed to something that's like, oh man, like these are some powerful spells. And maybe as the DM you go, yeah, okay, so mechanically you're not able to cast those spells technically, but you know what? I'm going to let you do it. We're going to roll. We're going to see if like something goes wrong because you don't do it well. But like, sure, I'll let you cast something at a higher power. And one of the things that I personally love about so many fantasy lore out there is that there's this idea in a lot of worlds and universes that there is a cost to magic. And certainly you can argue, okay, well, in D&D, that is the material components and this and that, and because there is that cost to it. But to me, it goes even further to saying, if magic done wrong or maybe done too much, may even start to break the world around you. And so, yeah,
I think that has
putting
to be part
that
of
power
it.
in front of them may be a fantastic thing momentarily, and it may make things go awry, something that they have to repair afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's an important part, because it's sort of like an innate check on players to make sure they don't stretch too far. Like, I want the ability to have 3,000 wishes, and then I'm going to root for 3,000 more wishes, But I love that idea that it has to come with a cost, because especially in my game too, they're all first year. So there's an 11-year-old witch with Voldemort's wand right now, running around in my world. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's a babysitter gone mad right there. Let me tell you.
Oh boy.
Well, I love the idea of what that cost looks like, because one of the things is, if it is that external source, is it a limited source? Did magic go away? Did magic break because everyone started using it too much? When you summon a creature, where in the world is that coming from? Where in another world is it coming from? Are you just a monster because you're summoning these creatures without like any moral like thought behind that idea? Is like, I summon a fireball, did I take fire away from somewhere else? And like I said, putting those costs in and figuring out where that fits for you, your world, and certainly your players, because some players would not appreciate all the words I just said.
Well, and then flip the script on it too, and go, all right, so that's our idea of like giving that thing of power, whether it's a wand or a tomb or whatever, to the players, and being like, yeah, are things going to go right or are things going to go wrong? Flip the script and now have the players be wizards that have studied about the truths of the universe, of how magic, if used wrong or too much, can go wrong. And then they find out about that 11-year-old who's running around with the wand of one of the greatest wizards of all time. And they go, oh my gosh, we need to find that kid. We need to stop them, whether it's a kid or it's a wizard who's just trying to gain power, and go, we need to protect them. We need to stop this, or the universe itself may break.
Well, and because this was a character that I didn't create, another person did for my previous running, and then this new version, this new sessions that I'm running, someone else picked it up. But the witch itself, the witch is a descendant of Morgan Le Fay. So you have that sort of like, family heritage and like power source running through too. So I love the idea that she is in danger. I love the idea that they will have to decide, what they're willing to do to, protect their friend, what they're willing to do to take on like these enemies who are approaching. And they're 11. Because every now and then, like when they're talking, like when the discussion gets really high level, I'm like, hey guys, remember you're 11. They're like, oh yeah, you should totally not have that thing. So it's kind of funny. I think that's really interesting, because it's really missing that aspect of depletion. It's really missing that aspect of like personal sacrifice, personal cost. It's like you can just keep going like bloop 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 bloop, and you're cool. So that's interesting.
I also think that we should remember, when thinking about adventures for wizards, with this academic aspect to wizards, like we've talked about already with Harry Potter, the Harry Potter universe, with the Magician's universe. We did a whole episode on schools of wizardry, like specific schools, so we won't go too into depth with that. But the idea of I can learn magic definitely creates a world where wizards are going to come together. They're going to build communities. They're going to share knowledge. They're going to try to learn from each other. So whether it's like governments that are run by wizards, or schools that are run by wizards, if you have a PC that is part of your group and they are a wizard, like, you should make these places apparent to them that they're going to want to go and learn and commune with other wizards, and see the spells that other wizards are casting, and read and share notes about lore that they've found on magic, or just spells themselves, and to be able to learn and be able to teach other wizards. That whole communal aspect of wizards, I think, is really interesting, and can certainly lead to different adventures, whether it's just your wizard probably wants to check out the 12 schools of wizardry that are in this land.
Well, and there's a book called Carry On. It's a young adult novel by Rainbow Rowell, which is basically like a fanfic of Harry Potter that she wrote for basically inside of one book, and then she wrote it itself as its own book. But the main Harry Potter like wizard in that book is like the guy that comes in and just smashes things up. He's the lucky one, who just happens to have the thing or just happens to do the thing that does it. And that's, the book is kind of an exploration for himself as far as like, am I really a wizard? Because yeah, I go and I solve the problem, but is it really me? And then they realize that every time he goes off, he's creating these dead spots where like the magic of those areas just evaporates and goes away. And, thinking about, that larger sort of like, this is kind of different. What you were just talking about schools of knowledge, and I'm kind of actually just going back to the previous question, I guess. But I'm thinking, but yeah, like as far as, thinking about like the impact on community, the impact on the world around, the impact as far as like sharing that knowledge, how that knowledge is shared, who controls access to the knowledge, is there unobtainable knowledge, is there knowledge no one should know, is there knowledge that should be buried, can you bury knowledge, can you really eradicate knowledge, is it okay to try to keep people from knowing what they could know? I mean, there's so many really good questions that come just from the idea of that collective school of knowledge and how you want your players to proceed in that.
And I am always an advocate for tying campaigns in to each other, having there be like a character that'll show up from one campaign to another, whether it's a PC, it used to be a PC, and bringing them in. I think that players really find that exciting when that happens. So leading from what you just said, Kathleen, I imagine a campaign where you go and your PCs are trying to stop this object or whatever it is, this power, from falling into the wrong hands, and maybe through magical means, at the end of the campaign, you're like, okay, so what do you do to protect this thing? You've recovered it. What do you do to protect it? Oh, we're gonna hide it on a whole different plane of existence. We're gonna drop it like into the deepest, darkest cave on this other plane so that nobody else finds it. But then in the next campaign, or the campaign 3 down the line, however many you get blessed being able to play, when you create a whole bunch of new characters, you start off that campaign with whispers or a map, an amazing map that points the direction to this item of power on a whole different plane, down the deepest, darkest tunnels of the deepest, darkest cave. And all of your players look at each other and they're like, oh my gosh, are we going after this? Have we now become the ones who are going to start the chaos in the world again as wizards who are going after this terrible piece of power?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too, because at the end of the day, if a very small select group of people have access to a level of power that so many don't, I mean, I think there's fair questions on whether or not they should have that. Should that be contained? Is that something that they should have in general, And I think, that's interesting.
I mean, that made me think, because we talking about their groups, but I guess they can a group of adventurers, one who happens to be a wizard unlocks a certain level of power, and then that becomes part of the adventure and quest, is the idea that like the world is not okay. Like, no, the person in your party shouldn't have this. And what lengths will the party go to either agree, disagree, stop it, help? I mean, there's a lot of ideas behind a wizard getting too much power.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or if you want to go a lighter route, recognize all these source materials that we've been talking about, like Harry Potter and the Magicians, although Magicians certainly is less light than Harry Potter.
Oh yeah, it's dark.
but to go, you know what, like play some 15-year-olds at a wizarding school and go on an adventure that year at that school. That's a fantastic campaign in itself. It doesn't need to be super world breaking. It could be something small like that, and that in itself could be fantastic. I think this is probably a good point to transition, speaking of a studious campaign like that, to our last topic, which is, of course, homework. Do we have any recommendations for our listeners of whether it's books, TV shows, movies, RPGs to explore if they want to dive deeper into the wizarding world, right? Where can they go and check out more material on this idea of a wizard?
Well, I mean, obviously, J.K. Rowling has not granted me the license to use Harry Potter. I'm working on it. You know, we're in negotiations. No, so it's something that I don't obviously put out there. But if it's something that someone's really interested in, that they could certainly share it with me, or I could share it with them. I'd be happy to talk about it. In addition, I think especially some of these more, like, if people haven't read The Witches, I'm basically repeating what we've already mentioned. If they haven't read The Witches, if you haven't read Carry On, if you haven't, I would read The Magicians. Honestly, the books are really, really good, because the main character is not likable, but it makes him, I think, in my view, a lot more relatable, and I like him a lot more than certainly I like even I don't really like Harry Potter, really. Neville's cool, but so that's what I would say is I like looking at different pop culture expressions than necessarily something that might be super, super like deep within the geeky sort of world, because especially for me, when I'm running games, especially for women, trying to give them access to playing RPGs, that picking source material that they may be more likely to become familiar with has certainly been helpful. I'm not saying that they're not reading Lord of the Rings or any of the other stuff, because certainly they are. I'm not necessarily, so I'm just drawing from what I know as well.
I think my homework would be to do what we talked about with diving in, if you have wizards in your gaming group, to dive in with them and encourage. Obviously, don't push a player to do something they don't want to do, but encourage them to dive into that studious academic aspect of their character, and maybe work with them to create new spells, exciting spells that can be used in the game to make it more exciting.
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties with this kind of homework is that there is just so much out there, and I think that that's probably the best thing to do, is to get out there, because things that came to mind were like, read the Dresden Files, go watch Full Metal Alchemist. Is that how you want to approach magic in your world? Or go watch the Sabrina series that's on Netflix right now. Like, figuring out what that looks like. And I think one of the interesting things would be to try and, one, find some piece of media that mimics your group. Like Kathleen, you're mentioning the 11-year-old. So finding source material that is used, that having characters around the same age experience, things like that. And at the same time, find something completely opposite to try and figure out what works best for the player. It's really difficult, because everything uses some element of magic, even things you wouldn't think would do it. Like, go watch the movies and incorporate Constantine into the world with Superman. Like, figuring out what, like I said, what works best for you, because it is everywhere.
Right. Well, and I think of it, sort of like almost analogous to like a dystopia. Dystopia is a world where there's like something has broken, and what we see is that, multiple iterations down the road, like, this is where they end up. The rule breaks. This is what happens. And it's almost with magic, you want to sort of like reverse engineer to that origination point, that whatever you break within the rules of what we have, where do you see this going, and where would you want it to go, or how could you guide it to get it there? And I think that can give you the ability to help players, develop and plan spells for the future, but also kind of give them a glimpse of what's to come, and that's always fun too.
Perfect. So speaking of plans for the future, our most important question is, where can people go and find all of the awesome stuff you're doing, like planning out how they're going to teach game design?
Yeah, well, I mean, KathleenMercury.com, very cleverly named, is my website where I put everything on there. Mostly it's my game design stuff, but I'm trying to put more and more stuff up on there too, as far as like the other stuff I do, as far as like RPGs and all that. So I'm on Twitter at Mercury with 7 M's, Mercury, on Board Game Geek as Funk Donut, one word. And so, especially when people are wanting to teach game design, I love helping to collaborate and help people shape and craft their classes for whatever they want to do. So it's super fun.
Phenomenal. So go check those out. And Kathleen, thanks for joining us again on the show, and we hope to have you back on sometime in the future.
Anytime. This was so fun, because so often I'm always talking about board games. So to be able to really delve into RPGs, especially since I'm running one right now that I need to figure out for Sunday, this could not have come at a better time.
Wonderful. We want to thank Kathleen once again for joining us on the show to talk about Wizards, my favorite player class of all. If you have some ideas about lore for Wizards, or how to run a wizard as a player, or how to run a wizard NPC as a DM, you can write into us with those ideas at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. If you liked this show or our other shows, please feel free to jump on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, whatever podcast app that you are using, and leave us a 5-star review. It helps us to spread the show out there to other DMs and people who may become DMs because they listen to us. That is such an awesome thing when that happens. So please give us a 5-star review. Let people know that you like the show. You can follow us on Twitter at DMS_block, that's at DMsBlock, and you can like our Facebook page. Both of those places are great places to go for updates about the show. As always, the Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network. Check out other shows like Dungeons & Dragons and Daughters, Detentions and Dragons, Geek Wars, and more. Well, that's it for this episode of the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come together to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and of course lowering the egos of all other people at the table. I'm your host, DM Mitch, reminding you to always keep on dungeon mastering. Talk to you soon.
Goodbye.